Habertürk'ten herkese merhabalar. Ben İrem Kuşoğlu Görgü'ye. Atlantik Konseyi Bölgesel Temiz ve Güvenli Enerji Konferansı'na İstanbul'da ev sahipliği yapıyor. Etkinlikte dünyanın temiz enerjiye geçişi ve işbirliği süreçleri tartışılıyor. İş dünyası, düşünce liderleri ve üst düzey hükümet yetkililerinin de konuk olarak yer aldığı etkinlikte konuklardan birisi olan ABD Enerji Kaynaklarından sorumlu Dışişleri Bakan Yardımcısı Geoffrey Pyatt da konuğumuz. Thank you so much for joining us.
No, thank you for having me.
So I would like to start with the Gastech event in Houston.
Yes.
You were speaking at a panel with the Turkish Energy Minister Bayraktar, and in the panel, Minister Bayraktar highlighted the importance of considering all energy resources from any direction and energy diversification. How does the U.S. assess Turkey's strategy in diversifying its energy supply, and what opportunities exist for deeper cooperation in energy infrastructure development?
Yeah, well, first of all, let me say I've been honored to have a number of opportunities to interact with Minister Bayraktar over the past few months. This week here in Istanbul, a couple of months ago in Washington, D.C., when he was there to see Secretary of Energy Granholm, and we launched the U.S.-Turkey Energy and Climate Partnership. But then really importantly in Gastech, which is an enormous event bringing together so many of America's companies. The minister delivered a very clear message then in terms of two issues. One is Turkey's dramatic progress in terms of its energy transition. I understand this well because I lived in the region for 6 years. Most Americans don't know how fast Turkey has been able to make progress in terms of its renewable energy ecosystem. Huge growth in wind, in solar, which is good for the climate, good for Turkish consumers, and good for our shared energy transition goals. But then the minister also delivered a very clear message in Houston in terms of the shift in Turkey's traditional energy mix and the fact that Turkey is going to be a major buyer of non-Russian sources of gas, LNG, from the United States in particular in the years ahead. It's a fantastic opportunity to grow our strategic energy partnership. We're very glad to see two long-term contracts already reached between BOTAŞ and Total and Shell. Those companies, European companies, but they're going to be bringing a lot of American molecules to Turkey, and we hope very much to see even more in the months ahead.
And I would like to continue with Mr. Bayraktar's remarks. Bayraktar's statement about Turkey's ability to source gas from various countries, including the U.S., which he also says the importance of the U.S. in this topic. How does the U.S. government view the strategic importance of Turkey as a transit hub to U.S. LNG to European markets, especially in the context of shifting global energy geopolitics? And do you see Turkey as a potential key hub for transferring energy to the other regions?
Yes and yes, it already is. I think one lesson that everybody has learned over the past 2 or 3 years is that Russia is never again going to be seen as a reliable energy supplier because of how Putin has weaponized Russia's gas resources, especially against Europe. The first country that was targeted for the cutoff of Gazprom resources was Bulgaria. I was still living in Greece at that point, and I vividly remember being with the Bulgarian Prime Minister in May of 2022. There was complete panic in Sofia about what was going to happen in the following winter because Bulgaria had been 100% dependent on Gazprom. So the agreement for cooperation between Turkey and Bulgaria in the lead up to that winter was vitally important, and I remember being involved in some of the conversations between Sofia and Ankara, including commercial negotiations about pricing and delivery schedules. Europe is in a much better position today. I talked about that in my remarks this morning at the conference. The regasification capacity that Turkey has developed, both FSRUs and onshore, is an important part of that overall story. As I described in my remarks, we see a southeastern European energy hub emerging here in Turkey with the FSRU in Alexandropoli, with the completion of the Southern Gas Corridor, a project that I was personally involved with during my time as ambassador, And the topic of my speech, I guess 5-6 years ago when I was first here in Istanbul for the Atlantic Council Conference, it's been a great success story for European energy security, but also for Turkey's role as a regional hub. And there's more of that will happen in the future as Europe looks to diversify away from Russia, because one thing that's very clear to me is nobody in Europe is going to go back to the situation of dependency that Europe was subject to when it was getting 40% of its gas from one country.
And I also would like to ask you about the U.S. energy companies' operations in Turkey. How can the expansion of U.S. energy companies in Turkey deepen the strategic energy partnership between two countries and contribute to their shared sustainability goals?
So I was just talking this morning with the president of the U.S.-Turkey Chamber of Commerce. I was honored to join Minister Bayraktar in Washington speaking to the U.S.-Turkey Chamber. We would love to see even more cooperation between our companies in this regard. I've talked in my remarks today about the really important role that we see for Turkish industry to play in the diversification of our supply chains for clean energy technologies, wind turbines, solar cells, batteries, processing of critical minerals. You have a world-class industrial base here, and we would love to see some of that industrial base brought to bear on the energy transition challenge. I heard yesterday from the Turkish government that we already have an American company working, I think, around Izmir in the south on wind turbine manufacturing. That should be happening over and over again because we need to scale up the production of these clean energy technologies as fast as possible. And there's an obvious opportunity to build on the long history of investment in both directions, the role that American companies have played in Turkey for many, many years, but also the possibility for us to be partners across a much wider region. Europe is going through a fundamental remapping of its energy system. The Europe energy infrastructure for many decades was based on cheap Russian gas. That's gone. So Europe is having to navigate two huge transitions at the same time. It's accelerating its green power plan, but the Repower EU program is focused on how to fill the hole created by the end of that Russian energy supply. Turkey is in a fantastic position to profit from that.
And how will the U.S. and Turkish energy climate dialogue, I actually want to ask you this, how will the U.S. and Turkey energy climate dialogue advance collaboration of renewable energy projects and align both countries' energy security strategies?
So, coming out of the minister's trip to Washington, we have created a series of working groups focused on specific areas of collaboration. One is clean energy and climate. Another is nuclear, and I was very glad to hear both Deputy Minister Ekinci and Minister Bayraktar talk about the plans that Turkey has in the nuclear power area. I would love for American companies to be your principal partners, both on small modular reactors and also on traditional reactors. I know that our companies are interested in working here. The Biden administration supports that. The part that I'm responsible for are foreign ministries. The two foreign ministries have one of the work groups which is specifically focused on regional cooperation. So that's where we discuss how we work together in Iraq, how we work together in Bulgaria, in Romania, how we work together in Central Asia and the Caspian region. So we see Turkey as a pivotal partner across all these different lines of collaboration. You asked sort of where do we see the greatest prospect? I'd really say all of the above. Because you have a huge economy, you have a growing population, you have growing energy demand, and we want to be your principal partner in meeting those requirements.
And you were saying the growing demand. So as of June 2023, 53% of Turkey's installed power capacity came from renewables,
right,
and projected to reach 65% by 2035.
Right.
And given the target of $100 billion trade volume between two countries, where does the renewable energy stand in this context?
Very high. And let me start with a really important point. I carry around in my phone a photograph that I took when I was in Rhodes in Greece in the summer of 2021, August. You had the terrible fires around Izmir at that point. I was sitting on the beach on the north coast of Rhodes looking towards Turkey. The sky was orange, like we were on Mars. I know better than most, I think, how vulnerable Turkey is to climate change and the urgency that you feel in terms of making the energy transition happen. Minister Bayraktar was crystal clear on that, both in Washington and also in his speech yesterday here at the Atlantic Council. We in the United States are also going through a huge energy transition. The Biden administration's Inflation Reduction Act is supercharging the investments that our major companies are making in new wind, new solar. I love to point out to international audiences, the #1 state in the US now for solar power generation is Texas. So the state that is home to our oil industry is also the biggest clean power generation state in the US. That says everything about what's happening in our country. It creates a challenge in terms of investment because there are so many opportunities in the US. And I'm sure a lot of the Turkish companies who are here at Atlantic Council are looking at those opportunities for investment and growth in the US. So Turkey has to make its own business case. But like I said, that's why I was glad to hear about the wind turbine example. You have a globally competitive maritime and shipping industry. And building offshore wind pylons is exactly the same as building a ship. And we need a lot more companies doing that kind of work. So we see a lot of possibility. It's exciting to see what's happening here in Turkey. As I was flying in from Athens yesterday, so we were coming over Thrace, and you could see, even compared to my last trip, you could see all the additional wind power construction that's happening all along that coast, which is a good thing for your citizens. It's demonstrated in the data, but also in terms of the price that Turkish consumers pay for the power they need to grow and to run your economy.
I also would like to ask you about the MCP forum, which Turkey joined the US and the EU in September.
Right.
How has Turkey's participation to Minerals Security Partnership contribute to strengthen its supply chains for critical minerals necessary for the country's energy transition and technological development?
So let me start with the most important point. In order to meet our energy transition goals and to build out renewable power infrastructure at the rate we need to hit net zero, we need to massively increase the volumes of energy minerals that we have available. Cobalt, lithium, nickel, zinc, copper, rare earths. And we can't be in a position where all of that growth happens because of Chinese companies going to Africa, mining the minerals, and taking it back to China for processing. So the good news is your country has literally hundreds and hundreds of years of history with mining. And you also have a globally competitive industrial sector. So you are perfectly positioned to move down the value stream. So we see Turkey as a partner both for extraction, as you've been doing for a long time, but also for the processing of those minerals. So for instance, Turkey has world-class rare earths resources. Right now, the vast majority of the world's rare earths processing happens in one country. That is not secure, it's not sustainable. We've already seen China impose export controls on gallium, on germanium, on graphite, the 3 Gs, and more recently on antimony. So it's very clear that the Chinese government is trying to leverage its market dominance, and we want to create diversity of sources and supplies. It's exactly like Russian gas.
And like the rest of the world, US is in the early stage of energy transition. And there is also China, like you mentioned, which has significant advantage at this point, like supply chains and like that. So how does the US plan to close this in critical mineral supply chain essential for the energy transition?
So let me start with the first point, which is we all do a lot of business with China. That's not going to change. The United States has a massive trade relationship with China. But what we want to do is make sure that our companies are positioned on the key sectors, the technological sectors of the future. Take solar, for instance. Solar voltaic cells were invented in the United States, in Bell Labs in upstate New York. Today, 90% of the upstream processing for solar manufacture happens in one country. We don't want to see that happen again. So we want to create diversity in these supply chains. That's part of what the Inflation Reduction Act was designed to accomplish. You're seeing big new investment in the US, companies from Korea, for instance, investing in new solar cell manufacture. But we will never be self-sufficient in the United States on these technologies, which is why we're so excited about broadening out the manufacturing base. Our Development Finance Corporation, to take an example, their largest single transaction in the whole world is a project with a company called First Solar that's doing solar cell manufacture in India. I know that our Export-Import Bank, our Development Finance Corporation, would love to expand their already strong base here in Turkey with more investment into these clean energy technology sectors. But we're trying to solve for two problems. We need more of everything, but we also need to do that in a way that is secure and diversified.
And lastly, I would like to ask you about the Inflation Reduction Act.
Sure.
Because it has been like more than 2 years now
Right.
since the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, which is the single largest investment in climate and energy in American history. So what process has been achieved so far in this process, and are the incentives and tax breaks for clean energy showing clear economic benefits and driving meaningful growth?
So I think the short answer is yes, and the proof is every time I travel elsewhere in the world, people are worried about how much investment is flowing into the United States in these sectors. We have seen literally billions of dollars of new investment and hundreds of thousands of jobs created. And it's doing two things. It's accelerating investment plans through tax incentives and other benefits, which are leading companies to speed up their plans for investing in new clean power generation technology investment. But it's also accelerating the pace of innovation. Because as you pointed out, we're all in the early days of this energy transition. And think about our smartphones. How much computing power we all hold in our pockets now. And think about those big desktop computers that we all had at home a few years ago. That reflects this dramatic transformation that's happened in the information technology space. The same thing's going to happen on energy technology. I was at Stanford University with some Japanese colleagues last year, and it was incredibly exciting to visit the materials science laboratories and see all the innovation that's happening on new battery storage chemistries, on more efficient transmission systems. We talked a lot at this Atlantic Council conference about the need for more interconnections. But that's also an area where we need to work smarter. We need to improve efficiency of our energy system. We need to build out new technologies for recycling. All of that is happening, and I'm very confident that the US is going to lead the way because of how our innovation ecosystem works at home. But I'm also confident that we have great potential to strengthen the US-Turkey alliance with this dimension of our economic collaboration.
Thank you so much for joining us and answering these questions.
No, thank you. I enjoyed the conversation, and it's a really, really important set of topics.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.